He begged me, pretend you're my fiancé just for tonight. I thought it was harmless, until his wealthy grandmother burst in, looked me up and down, and decided to destroy me. Before the story begins, subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from, because this fake engagement turns into the most calculated revenge you'll ever hear. The lie that was never meant to end. I didn't believe in fate, not anymore. Life had taught me that most disasters didn't arrive with thunder or warning signs. They came disguised as coincidences, wrapped in familiar faces, smiling like old friends. That night, fate was standing outside the cafe where I worked, soaked in rain, wearing an expensive coat that didn't belong in my world. Emily. Wait. The sound of my name made my shoulders tense before I even turned around. No one ever said it that carefully anymore. I hadn't heard that voice since a lifetime ago, back when dreams still felt realistic and rent didn't feel like a monthly punishment. I turned, and there he was, Daniel Hawthorne. For a moment, I wondered if exhaustion was finally making me hallucinate. Daniel didn't belong on this cracked sidewalk, under a flickering street lamp, outside a cafe that barely survived month to month. He looked refined now, taller somehow, sharper. His posture carried the confidence of someone who had options, real ones, the kind I never had. Daniel, I asked, is that really you? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Yeah, it's me. Rain streamed down between us, soaking my thin jacket. I'd just finished a 10-hour shift, my feet aching, my hands smelling like burnt coffee and sanitizer. I was already calculating how much longer I could keep ignoring the hospital bills stuffed inside my bag. What are you doing here? I asked. He glanced behind him, toward a black luxury SUV parked across the street. The driver sat still, waiting, watching. I need to talk to you, Daniel said. Please, just a minute. Every instinct told me to leave. People from the past usually came back for one reason: to take something. I'm tired, I said. Make it quick. He stepped under the awning with me, lowering his voice. I need a favor. I laughed softly, the kind of laugh you use to protect yourself. That's funny. You disappeared for 5 years, and now you need a favor. I know, he said. I deserve that, but this is important. Important how? I asked. He hesitated, rubbing his jaw like he was rehearsing the truth and the lie at the same time. My grandmother is in town. The way he said it, tight, controlled, made my stomach knot. She's influential, he continued. Very. She runs the Hawthorne family, the businesses, the trusts, everything. I folded my arms. Okay, and she's been pressuring me to get married. I shrugged. That sounds like a rich people problem. I told her I was already engaged. I stared at him. You what? I panicked. He said quickly. She cornered me. She wanted names, details, timelines. I needed someone believable, someone real. A chill crept down my spine. Daniel. Who did you tell her you were engaged to? His silence answered before his mouth did. You didn't, I whispered. I did, he admitted. I showed her your picture. My laugh was sharp and humorless. You are out of your mind. She wants to meet you, he rushed. Tonight, just dinner. One night. You pretend. That's it. After that, I'll tell her it didn't work out. I shook my head. Absolutely not. Emily, no, I said firmly. Your family, your lies, your money, that's not my problem. I stepped away, but he followed. I'll help you, he said. Financially. I froze. I know about your mom, he continued. Her treatments, the insurance gaps. I know about your loans. I know how hard you've been working. My chest tightened. How do you know that? I never stopped looking, he said quietly. I just didn't know how to come back. Rain soaked into my hair as I weighed my pride against reality, against my mom pretending she wasn't scared, against the voicemail reminders I hadn't returned because I couldn't. One night, I said finally, no photos, no promises, no future. Thank you, he breathed. I swear this is just temporary. That was the first lie. The Hawthorne estate rose from the darkness like a monument to judgment. Iron gates opened silently. The driveway curved through perfectly trimmed hedges. Everything whispered money, old, powerful, untouchable money. Inside, staff moved like ghosts. No wasted motion, no wasted words. You'll be fine, Daniel said, adjusting his cufflinks. Just be yourself. I laughed under my breath. That's exactly what will get me in trouble. Before he could respond, the air shifted. Footsteps echoed down the marble hallway, deliberate. Then she appeared, Eleanor Hawthorne. She was smaller than I expected, wrapped in pearls and control. Her silver hair was pinned back tightly. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, ancient with experience. When she looked at me, I felt exposed, like she could see every overdue bill, every insecurity, every reason I didn't belong. So, she said calmly, "This is the girl." Daniel straightened. "Grandmother, this is Emily, my fiancée." Eleanor didn't smile. She didn't nod. She simply stared. "You look ordinary," she said at last. The word hit harder than an insult. She stepped closer, her cane tapping softly. "I can always tell when someone is pretending." Then she smiled slow. "Dangerous. Dinner is ready," she said. "Let's see how convincing this engagement really is." And in that moment, standing in a mansion that wasn't built for people like me, I understood something chilling. This wasn't a favor. This was the beginning of a war. Dinner at the Hawthorne estate didn't feel like a meal, it felt like a trial. The dining room alone was larger than my entire apartment. Long polished table, high ceilings, walls lined with oil paintings of men who looked important simply because history had decided they were. Their eyes followed you, judging silently, as if daring you to sit where you didn't belong. Eleanor Hawthorne took her seat at the head of the table, without asking anyone else to sit first. That alone told me everything about the power dynamic in this house. "Sit," she said, not looking at either of us. Daniel pulled out a chair for me, his smile tight, rehearsed. I lowered myself into it carefully, aware of every movement, every breath. My clothes suddenly felt cheaper. My hands felt clumsy. Servants appeared immediately, pouring wine, placing plates with synchronized precision. No one asked what I wanted. They already knew what Eleanor wanted me to have. Eleanor lifted her glass, finally looking directly at me. "So, Emily," she said, "tell me where you're from." I swallowed. "Just outside the city." "Where exactly?" She pressed that. I named the neighborhood. Her lips curved faintly. "Ah, I see." I felt Daniel stiffen beside me. "And what do your parents do?" she continued. "My father passed away," I said carefully. "My mother—" I didn't ask about sentiment, Eleanor interrupted. "I asked about occupation." The table went quiet. "She worked retail most of her life." I finished. "She's sick now." "How unfortunate," Eleanor said, already bored. Daniel cleared his throat. "Grandmother," she raised a finger, silencing him instantly. "So you come from very humble beginnings," Eleanor said, "and now you're engaged to my grandson." "Yes," I said, meeting her gaze. "I am." She studied me like an object at auction, assessing flaws, weaknesses, resale value. "How did you two meet?" she asked. Daniel answered too quickly. "We reconnected recently." "Recently," Eleanor repeated slowly. "Interesting, and yet you're already engaged." I smiled politely. "When you know, you know." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "That sounds like something people say when they're rushing." The first course arrived, untouched by appetite. "So tell me," Eleanor continued, "what do you do for a living?" "Emily, I work at a cafe," I said. "A cafe?" she echoed, as if tasting something unpleasant. "Is that temporary?" "No," I replied. "It pays my bills." She set her fork down. "Daniel has never dated someone who works with their hands." I forced a calm tone. "There's nothing wrong with honest work." "Oh, I agree," Eleanor said smoothly. "I just find it incompatible with legacy." That word, legacy. She leaned back slightly. "You do understand what it means to marry into this family, don't you?" "I do," I said. "No," she corrected. "You don't. That's not an insult. It's simply fact." Daniel finally snapped. "Grandmother, that's enough." Eleanor turned her head slowly. "Enough when I say it's enough." Daniel fell silent. She turned back to me. "This family has survived wars, scandals, market crashes. We do not make impulsive decisions." Her eyes hardened. "And we certainly don't allow outsiders to threaten stability." Threaten. The word lingered in the air. "I'm not a threat," I said quietly. She smiled. "Every outsider is." Dessert was served, something delicate and expensive I barely touched. "Emily," Eleanor said casually, "what are your intentions with my grandson?" I felt my pulse quicken. "I care about him." "That's not what I asked." I chose my words carefully. "My intention is to build a life together." Eleanor nodded. "With his money." The accusation landed hard. Daniel pushed his chair back. "That's unfair." Eleanor ignored him. "Do you know how many women have tried to attach themselves to this family?" I met her stare. "I'm not one of them." "Everyone says that," she replied, "until they are." She dabbed her lips with a napkin. "You may go now." Daniel blinked. Dinner isn't finished. It is for me, Eleanor said, and I've learned all I need for tonight. As we stood, she added, Emily, you'll be staying here during your engagement. I froze. I'm sorry. It's important, Eleanor continued, to observe those who wish to become Hawthorns, up close. Daniel turned pale. Grandmother, we didn't discuss that. I don't discuss decisions, she said. I make them. She looked at me again. Unless, of course, you have something to hide. The room seemed to shrink. I forced a smile. Of course not. Her smile returned sharp and satisfied. Good, she said. Then, welcome to the Hawthorne household. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, if you could call a bedroom. Larger than my apartment, a guest room. Everything smelled expensive, clean, untouchable, but beneath it all, I felt something darker. I wasn't a guest. I was a subject. A knock came at the door around midnight. Daniel slipped inside, eyes wide. I didn't know she'd do that, he whispered. She never does that. You lied to me, I said quietly. I swear, Emily, this was supposed to be one dinner. I looked at him, then really looked at him. He was scared. She's testing you, he said. She does this to everyone. No, I replied. She's hunting. He swallowed. What do you want to do? I stared at the ornate ceiling, thinking of my mother's bills, thinking of the way Eleanor looked at me, not with hatred, but with curiosity, like a puzzle she wanted to break. I'll stay, I said finally. Daniel frowned. Are you sure? Yes, I said, but understand this, if she thinks she's breaking me. I smiled faintly in the dark. She's making a mistake, because Eleanor Hawthorne thought she was the hunter. She had no idea she'd just invited revenge into her house. Morning at the Hawthorne estate didn't begin with sunlight. It began with control. At precisely 6 a.m., a sharp knock echoed through the door of my bedroom, not a polite knock, but the kind meant to command obedience. Before I could even sit up, the door opened. A woman stepped in without asking. She was in her late 40s, dressed in a crisp gray suit, hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. Her eyes were efficient, cold, and dismissive. I'm Margaret, she said, house manager. She glanced at the untouched luxury around me like it offended her. You're late, I blinked. Late for what? For your evaluation. She replied flatly. Evaluation. The word echoed uncomfortably as she handed me a neatly printed schedule. Breakfast with staff, tours of the estate, lunch with Eleanor Hawthorne, afternoon observation, dinner, formal. No mention of rest. No option to refuse. I didn't agree to this, I said. Margaret raised one eyebrow. Mrs. Hawthorne believes that anyone unworthy will complain. Then she turned and walked out. Breakfast was not held in the dining room. It was held in the staff quarters. The room was modest compared to the rest of the mansion, but still nicer than any place I'd lived. About a dozen staff members sat quietly at a long table. When I entered, conversation stopped. Margaret gestured sharply. Sit. I sat. Eyes scanned me open, curious, skeptical, cautious. These people knew something I didn't, or maybe they knew exactly what I was. Margaret spoke without preamble. Emily will be joining us for breakfast. A man across the table scoffed under his breath. Margaret's eyes snapped to him, something to say. He looked away immediately. She turned to me. You may serve? I stared. Serve? Yes, Margaret said calmly. If you're to be part of this family, you should understand what makes it function. A tray was shoved in front of me. Plates, cups, utensils. I hesitated only a moment before standing. I had worked service jobs my entire adult life. Eleanor Hawthorne thought this would humiliate me. She was wrong. As I poured coffee and passed plates, I noticed things. Who avoided eye contact, who flinched when Margaret passed behind them, who looked angry instead of afraid. One woman, young Latina, hands trembling, whispered thank you when I set down her plate. Margaret noticed. Don't encourage familiarity. She snapped at me. I met her gaze. It's just politeness. Her lips thinned. That won't serve you here. After breakfast, I was escorted through the estate, not as a guest, but as an inspection item. This wing is private, Margaret said sharply as I glanced down the hallway. What's down there? I asked. Not your concern. That answer alone made it very much my concern. Lunch with Eleanor was held on the terrace. She was already seated, sipping tea, posture immaculate. Sit, she said. I did. I've been informed you performed adequately this morning, Eleanor said. No complaints. That was the goal, I replied. She studied me carefully. Do you think politeness is strength? I think it's a choice, I said. She smiled faintly. You'll learn. She gestured to the food. Eat. As I lifted my fork, she spoke again. Do you know why I asked you to stay? So you can decide whether I'm good enough, I said. Incorrect, Eleanor replied. I already know you're not. The words landed without emotion. I asked you to stay, she continued, because I want to see how you behave when you're uncomfortable. She leaned forward slightly. People reveal themselves when they believe they are powerless. I swallowed. And what have I revealed? I asked. She smiled. Not enough, yet. The afternoon was worse. I was instructed to assist staff again, laundry this time. Margaret hovered constantly, correcting non-existent mistakes. You folded that wrong. That stain should have been removed. Do it again. Each time louder, each time in front of others. Daniel appeared briefly at one point, looking horrified. Why is she doing this? He whispered to me. Because she can, I replied. He clenched his jaw. I'll talk to her. No, I said quickly. Don't. He hesitated. Emily, if you interfere, I said, she'll escalate. He looked sick. You shouldn't have to do this. No, I agreed. But I will, because something had shifted. Eleanor believed she was breaking me. What she didn't realize was that she was teaching me how her house worked, who held power, who abused it, who resented it, and resentment, I knew well. Dinner was formal. Again, that this time, other family members attended, distant cousins, board members, people who smiled without warmth. Eleanor made sure I was seated at the far end of the table. Conversation flowed around me like I wasn't there. At one point, a woman laughed. So, Emily, what do you bring to the Hawthorne name? Forks paused. Eyes turned. I set my napkin down slowly. I bring honesty, I said. Something money can't buy. A murmur rippled through the table. Eleanor's gaze sharpened. How quaint, she said. And what value does that have? I met her eyes. More than you think. For the first time, her smile faltered. Just slightly. That night, back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, heart racing, not from fear, but from clarity. This wasn't about love. It wasn't about Daniel. It wasn't even about money. This was about control. And Eleanor Hawthorne had made one critical error. She assumed I had nothing to lose. She didn't know about my patience, my memory, or how dangerous someone becomes once they stop begging to belong. As I turned off the light, one thought settled in calmly, decisively. If she wanted a test, I would pass it, and then I would rewrite the rules. Power doesn't announce itself when it's threatened. It watches, it waits, and then it strikes where you least expect it. By the fourth morning in the Hawthorne estate, I stopped feeling like a guest entirely. I was inventory. Margaret no longer bothered pretending otherwise. She didn't knock when she entered my room. She didn't explain instructions. She simply issued them, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp with a quiet kind of cruelty that suggested she enjoyed this far more than she admitted. Mrs. Hawthorne wants you dressed appropriately today, she said, laying out a conservative cream dress that looked more like a uniform than clothing. You'll be accompanying her to a board luncheon. A board luncheon? I asked. Margaret's lips curved faintly. Observation only. Translation. Public judgment. The luncheon was held in a private room at one of the most exclusive clubs in the city. Crystal glasses, white linens, low voices heavy with entitlement. Men and women, who controlled industries, sat around the table as though the world naturally bent in their direction. Eleanor arrived last. Of course. Emily, she said coolly, sit beside me. Not beside Daniel. Beside her, I took my seat, aware of eyes flicking toward me with curiosity, skepticism, and something else, amusement. And who is this? A man asked, nodding in my direction. Eleanor smiled thinly. A temporary concern. The table chuckled. I said nothing. Throughout the lunch, Eleanor spoke deliberately over me, around me, about Miniver to me. Some people believe proximity to wealth equals worth, she said casually, stirring her tea. Yes, well, a woman replied, they often learn otherwise. Their laughter was quiet, refined, merciless. Then Eleanor made her mistake. Emily, she said suddenly, turning to me, why don't you tell everyone about your background? Every conversation stopped. This wasn't curiosity. This was theater. I met her gaze calmly. What would you like to know? She raised an eyebrow. Education, ambitions, plans. I inhaled, slowly. I put myself through community college while working full-time. I had to pause when my mother got sick. My ambition is stability. My plan is survival. The table went silent. Eleanor's expression tightened. How earnest! One man cleared his throat. That sort of determination is admirable. Eleanor's eyes snapped to him, warning. The moment passed, but not unnoticed. As we stood to leave, Eleanor leaned close to me. Be careful, she murmured. You almost sounded human. Back at the estate, Daniel cornered me near the garden. This has gone too far, he said, voice low. She's humiliating you on purpose. Yes, I replied, and I won't allow it any more. I studied him. Are you saying that for me or for yourself? He hesitated. That told me everything. She controls your trust, doesn't she? I asked quietly. His jaw tightened. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I interrupted. She owns you, and you're afraid to admit it. His silence confirmed it. That night, unable to sleep, I wandered the halls carefully, barefoot, memorizing the estate's quiet rhythms. That's when I saw a door slightly ajar, the private wing. I hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. The hallway was darker, older, less polished, as if this part of the house had secrets it didn't want displayed. One room drew my attention. An office. The desk was cluttered with files, not decorative, not ceremonial. Real. I shouldn't have touched them. I did anyway. Contracts, shell companies, offshore accounts. Then I saw a familiar name. Margaret. Not as staff. As beneficiary. My pulse quickened. Before I could examine further, a voice froze me in place. You shouldn't be here. Eleanor stood in the doorway. Her expression wasn't angry, it was curious. How long have you been snooping? She asked. I got lost, I said calmly. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. You're either very stupid, she said, or very brave, or very tired of being underestimated, I replied. Her smile returned, but it was different now, sharper, more alert. You think you found something, she said. I think, I replied evenly, that you hide your weaknesses behind loyalty bought with money. She studied me for a long moment. Daniel chose poorly, she said finally. Did he? I asked. Or did you never give him a chance to choose at all? That struck something, just slightly. You're not as harmless as I thought, Eleanor said. And you're not as untouchable as you believe, I replied. For the first time since I arrived, she didn't dismiss me, she evaluated me. Be careful, she said softly. People who dig too deep disappear. I met her gaze. So do people who underestimate. She stepped aside, allowing me to leave. As I walked away, my hands shook not with fear, but adrenaline. Because now I knew. This family wasn't just wealthy, they were dirty. And Margaret, the loyal gatekeeper, was being paid to stay silent. The next morning, Eleanor summoned me privately. You've been an inconvenience, she said, but inconveniences can be useful. I'm listening, I replied. I'll make you an offer, she said. Leave, Daniel, quietly. I'll compensate you generously. I smiled. No, I said. Her eyes hardened. You don't understand what you're refusing. Oh, I replied calmly. I understand perfectly. Because the moment she offered to buy my silence, she confirmed she had something worth hiding, and I now had something worth destroying her with. Revenge doesn't begin with anger, it begins with listening. After Eleanor made her offer money in exchange for my disappearance, I understood something vital. She didn't see me as powerless anymore. She saw me as a veritable. And powerful people hate variables they can't control. What she didn't realize was that I'd already begun building something she couldn't buy. It started in silence. Margaret avoided me for 2 days after the office incident. When she did appear, her cruelty sharpened, like someone lashing out to reassert authority. You're needed in the East Wing, she snapped one morning. Clean in. I nodded. Of course, the East Wing was older, less maintained, fewer cameras. Margaret knew that. She stood watching as I scrubbed surfaces that were already clean, correcting me loudly, theatrically. You missed a spot, she said. I leaned closer, lowering my voice. You're listed as a beneficiary on 3 Hawthorne shell companies. Her hand twitched. I didn't look at her when I continued. That kind of loyalty doesn't come cheap, she hissed, grabbing my arm hard enough to bruise. You don't know what you're talking about. I met her eyes calmly. I know you're paid to protect Eleanor's secrets, and I know you're terrified of losing that protection. Her grip loosened. We stood there, frozen, until footsteps echoed down the hall. Margaret released me immediately and stepped back, face composed. Finish quickly, she snapped, then walked away. But her pace was different now. unsteady. That afternoon, I ate lunch in the staff quarters again, this time by choice. The same young woman from before sat across from me. She hesitated before speaking. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "She watches everything." "So do I replied quietly. Her eyes widened slightly. "My name is Rosa," she said after a pause. "She fires people who talk." "I'm not asking you to talk," I said. "I'm asking you to listen." I leaned closer. "How many staff members have left suddenly in the last year?" Rosa swallowed. "Too many." "How many signed non-disclosure agreements?" I asked. "All of them." "And how many were paid enough to stay silent?" She looked down. "Not enough." That was the answer I needed. Daniel confronted me that evening. "This has to stop," he said sharply. "She offered you money. Just take it." I studied him. "Is that what you want?" "Yes," he said. "I want this nightmare to end." "For who?" I asked. He rubbed his temples. "You don't understand what she's capable of." "I'm starting to," I replied. "Are you?" He exhaled heavily. "She built everything." "No," I corrected. "She bought it and buried what didn't fit." His eyes flickered. "You know," I continued softly, "your grandmother doesn't trust you." "That's not true." "She trusts control," I said. "Not blood." He turned away. "You should leave," he said quietly, "before she hurts you." I stepped closer. "Daniel, she already has, and you let her." That one landed. He didn't respond. The next move wasn't loud, it was precise. Thought Margaret requested a private meeting. 2 nights later, she chose the laundry room ironically. "Fitting. You need to stop digging," she said. "I will," I replied, "when you tell me why Eleanor keeps you close." Margaret laughed bitterly. "Because I clean up her messes." "And if you don't?" I asked. "She destroys you." I nodded. "That's what she wants you to believe." Margaret stared at me for a long moment. "You're playing a dangerous game." "No," I replied. "I'm offering you an exit." Her jaw tightened. "She won't fall," Margaret said. "Not for you." "I don't need her to fall," I said. "I just need her exposed." Margaret scoffed. "You think anyone will believe you?" I smiled. "Not me, you." Her breath caught. "You've signed documents," I continued. "Handled payments, covered scandals. If this ever goes public, she ruined me," Margaret snapped. "No," I corrected. "She sacrificed you." That silence was louder than anything she'd said. "What do you want?" she whispered. I met her gaze. Proof came faster than I expected. 3 days later, Rosa slipped me a flash drive while clearing plates. "Margaret told me to give this to you," she whispered. She said you'd know what to do." That night, alone, in my room, I plugged it into my laptop. Emails, contracts, settlements, payoffs to former employees, medical silence agreements. One document stood out: a wrongful death settlement, tied to one of Eleanor's factories overseas. My hands trembled. This wasn't just corporate greed, it was blood. The next morning, Eleanor summoned me. She stood by the window, back to me. "You've made my household restless," she said. "That's unacceptable." "I agree," I replied. She turned. "Margaret tells me you've been curious." "I learned quickly," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "Curiosity gets people hurt. So does arrogance," I replied. She studied me like a chessboard. "You think you have leverage," she said. "I think," I replied evenly, "you underestimated the cost of humiliating someone with nothing left to lose." For the first time, Eleanor raised her voice. "You are nothing," she snapped. "A temporary inconvenience." I smiled softly. "Then why are you so angry?" Her silence confirmed it. Later that night, Daniel appeared at my door, pale. "She's auditing the trust," he said. "Everything's locked down." "That means she's scared," I replied. "You did this," he said. "Yes," I agreed. "And now you have a choice." He looked at me, eyes desperate. "What choice?" "Stand with me," I said, "or let her destroy you too." He didn't answer, but the fact that he didn't walk away told me something crucial. The Hawthorne empire was cracking, and Eleanor still didn't realize that the quiet girl she tried to break was now holding the knife. Eleanor Hawthorne did not panic. That was the first thing I learned when she realized the knife was no longer in her hand. She recalculated. The morning after, Daniel warned me about the trust audit. The atmosphere in the estate shifted. The staff moved faster, quieter. Doors that were once open were now locked. Smiles vanished. Even the walls felt tense, like they were holding their breath. Margaret didn't look at me once. That alone told me everything. Eleanor was preparing something. My phone buzzed while I was in the garden and Unfamiliar number. Unknown. You need to check your bank account. Now. My stomach dropped. I logged in. Every dollar Daniel had transferred to help my mother frozen, reversed, flagged. Then another notification came through. Credit alert. New legal inquiry filed under your name. I felt cold. I marched inside, straight to Eleanor's office, ignoring Margaret's sharp protests. Eleanor sat behind her desk, calm, composed, already victorious. You move quickly, I said. She smiled. So do consequences. What did you do? I demanded. I protected my family, she replied smoothly. You should have taken the money and left. You're punishing my mother, I said, voice shaking. She has nothing to do with this. Eleanor leaned back. Everyone has something to do with this once they involve themselves. You froze my accounts, I said. Filed false claims. I filed concerns, she corrected. Very serious ones. She slid a folder across the desk. Fraud allegations, identity misuse, breach of confidentiality, all lies. All it takes, Eleanor continued, is doubt. Doubt spreads faster than truth. I stared at her. You're trying to scare me into silence. She nodded slightly. Fear is efficient. I laughed softly. That surprised her. You really believe this ends with me walking away, I said, but you just crossed a line you can't uncross. Her eyes hardened. You're not in control here. No, I agreed, but neither are you anymore. Daniel didn't come to my room that night. He didn't answer my calls. The next morning, I found out why. The Hawthorne Foundation had announced a press conference. Daniel stood beside Eleanor on every news channel, jaw tight, eyes hollow. Recent allegations have surfaced involving a private individual who misrepresented herself to our family. Eleanor said calmly to the cameras, we are cooperating fully with authorities. The anchor's voice followed. Sources confirmed the individual was romantically involved with a Hawthorne heir under false pretenses. False pretenses. My phone exploded with messages. Friends confused, coworkers worried, strangers cruel. Then Daniel's message finally came through. Daniel, I'm sorry. She gave me no choice. I stared at the screen until my hands stopped shaking. He chose her. The cafe fired me that afternoon. We can't be associated with this, my manager said apologetically. It's high profile. By evening, my landlord left a voicemail. By night, my mother called, crying. They delayed my treatment, she said. They said there's a problem with the payments. That was when something inside me hardened completely. Eleanor hadn't just attacked me, she tried to erase me. Margaret came to my room after midnight. She locked the door behind her. They're going to frame you, she whispered. She's building a case. I know, I replied. She used Daniel, Margaret said bitterly. She always does. I looked at her. Did you know about the press conference? Margaret nodded. I warned him. He didn't listen. I held up the flash drive. I have everything, I said, but it's not enough yet. Margaret swallowed. What do you need? Timing, I said, and witnesses. Her voice shook. She'd destroy us. No, I corrected. She'd try. The opportunity came faster than expected. Eleanor announced a charity, gala public, televised, untouchable. She's laundering goodwill. Margaret said, every time she feels threatened. Perfect, I replied. That night, Daniel finally showed up. He looked broken. She's filing charges, he said. Tomorrow? You knew she would, I replied. She promised if I cooperated. She promised control. I said, not mercy. He sank onto the bed. What do you want from me? I studied him carefully. The truth, I said, on record. He shook his head. She disinherit me. She already owns you, I replied. This is your only chance to be free. He hesitated. Then he nodded. I'll testify, he whispered. I'll give you everything. I didn't feel relief. I felt resolve. The next day, Eleanor struck again. Police arrived at the estate with a warrant. Not for me, for Margaret. She's framing her. Margaret sobbed as they led her away. She's burning her exits. I clenched my fists. This was Eleanor's final tactic, sacrifice a lieutenant to protect the throne. But Eleanor made one fatal mistake. She assumed I would retreat. Instead, I stepped forward. I called the journalist whose name I'd found buried in the settlement files. I have proof, I said calmly, and witnesses. There was a pause. Meet me tonight, he said, before the gala. As I ended the call, I looked around the mansion one last time. This house had tried to break me. Instead, it had trained me. Eleanor Hawthorne thought this was her. Counter-strike. She had no idea she'd just forced me to go public, and once the truth leaves the excess shadows, there's no mansion big enough to hide from it. The Hawthorne Charity Gala was designed to rewrite history. That's what Eleanor always did when she felt threatened. She buried reality beneath elegance, drowned truth in champagne, and let the world applaud while she erased inconvenient people. The ballroom glittered like a lie polished to perfection. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over silk gowns and tailored suits. Cameras flashed. Donors smiled. Every inch of the room screamed respectability. Eleanor stood at the center of it all, regal, untouchable, her arm resting lightly on Daniel's like he was still a possession she hadn't decided whether to keep. When she saw me enter, her smile froze. Just for a fraction of a second. I wore a simple black dress, not expensive, not flashy, deliberate. I wasn't here to blend in, I was here to be remembered. Whispers followed me across the marble floor. That's her, the girl from the scandal. I thought she disappeared. I walked calmly, head high, pulse steady. Fear had burned out days ago. What remained was clarity. The journalist Mark Reynolds waited near the bar, pretending to check his phone. When our eyes met, he nodded once. Daniel noticed me then. His face drained of color. He leaned toward Eleanor, whispering urgently. Her fingers tightened around her cane. "She's not supposed to be here," Eleanor hissed. Daniel swallowed. "I didn't invite her." Her gaze snapped back to me, cold, calculating. For the first time, Eleanor Hawthorne looked uncertain. The speeches began. Eleanor took the stage, applause erupting immediately. She raised her hands, gracious, composed. "Tonight," she said, voice smooth and confident, "we celebrate compassion, responsibility, and the values that have guided the Hawthorne family for generations." I almost laughed that she spoke of ethics, of transparency, of community. Behind her, a massive screen displayed smiling children, factories, clean water, initiatives, carefully curated images, hiding carefully buried bodies. Mark leaned closer to me. "You ready?" I nodded. "Once this starts," he said quietly, "there's no stopping it." "I know," I replied. That was the point. Daniel stepped away from Eleanor just as the applause faded. He walked toward the microphone. Eleanor stiffened. "What are you doing?" she whispered harshly. Daniel stopped center stage. "I need to say something," he said into the mic. A murmur rippled through the room. "This wasn't planned," Daniel continued, voice shaking slightly, "but it needs to be said." Eleanor reached for him. He stepped away. "I lied," he said, "about Emily. About my grandmother. About everything." The room went silent. Cameras adjusted. Phones lifted. Eleanor's face hardened. "Daniel," she warned. "She didn't manipulate me," Daniel said. "I asked her to pretend. I dragged her into this." Gasps echoed. "And when my grandmother felt threatened," he continued, "she tried to destroy her." Kane hit the floor sharply. "Ungrateful boy," she hissed. Mark moved fast. The screen behind Eleanor flickered. Images replaced the charity. Montage, emails, contracts, settlements. A headline appeared. "Hawthorne Industries settled wrongful death. Claim confidential." Throom erupted. "What is this?" someone shouted. Eleanor spun toward the screen. "Turn that off." No one listened. Mark stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said clearly, "what you're seeing are verified documents showing systemic cover-ups, silenced employees, and financial coercion tied directly to Hawthorne Industries." Eleanor looked around, stunned. This wasn't how power worked. This wasn't how it ended. Security moved toward me. I stepped forward instead. "Stop," Daniel said sharply. "Let her speak." All eyes turned to me. I took the microphone. "My name is Emily," I said, "and I was invited into this family as entertainment, as a test, as someone they believed they could break." Eleanor stared at me with naked fury. "I was humiliated," I continued, "threatened, framed. My mother's medical care was delayed because I refused to disappear quietly." Murmurs turned to outrage. "This family uses money as a weapon," I said, "and loyalty as leverage." Eleanor stepped toward me. "You think this ends well for you." I met her gaze. "It already has." Police officers entered the ballroom. The room froze. A detective approached Eleanor. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said, "we have questions regarding several financial transactions and settlement agreements." Her composure cracked. "This is harassment," she snapped. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," the detective replied calmly. "That's why we're here." Daniel stood beside me now. "I gave them everything," he whispered. I nodded. Eleanor looked at him, like he was already dead. Chose her, she said coldly. Daniel met her eyes. You never chose me. That broke something. Eleanor's hand trembled. For the first time in her life, the room wasn't bending for her. It was watching her fall, as officers escorted Eleanor away for questioning. Not arrested yet, but no longer untouchable. The applause didn't come. Silence did. The worst kind. Mark turned to me. This will go everywhere. Good, I replied. Outside, flashes exploded as Eleanor was guided into a car. She looked at me through the glass, and for the first time, there was fear. Real fear. Not of losing money, of losing control. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I simply watched, because revenge wasn't loud. It was public, and this was only the beginning. Public humiliation is never the end for people like Eleanor Hawthorne. It's an inconvenience. The night of the gala exploded across every major outlet by morning. Headlines screamed words Eleanor had spent a lifetime outrunning coercion, settlements, silence bought. Videos of Daniel speaking trended for hours. Clips of me standing at the microphone spread faster than the truth ever had before. But by noon, Eleanor's counter-narrative had already begun. She didn't deny the documents. She reframed them. Her attorneys issued statements, filled with polished language and legal jargon-related incidents, historic misunderstandings, no admission of wrongdoing. They questioned credibility. They questioned motives. They questioned me. By evening, the tone had shifted. Not what did Hawthorne Industries do, but who is Emily really? It started subtly. Anonymous sources claimed I was unstable, opportunistic, that I'd planned everything, that I'd targeted Daniel intentionally. Then came the opinion pieces. The dangers of weaponized victims. When outsiders infiltrate powerful families. My name was rarely mentioned directly, but the implication was always there. Eleanor Hawthorne hadn't fallen. She had dug in. The lawsuit arrived 3 days later. Defamation, breach of privacy, conspiracy to damage reputation. 3 separate filings, 3 different courts. I stared at the papers spread across my small same apartment I'd returned to after being escorted out of the Hawthorne estate with cameras still flashing behind me. Daniel stood near the window, pale and hollow-eyed. She's trying to bury you in legal fees, he said quietly. She's done this before. I looked up at him. You mean like she did to the employees? He flinched. Yes. My phone buzzed again. Another alert. Another article. Another stranger deciding who I was without ever meeting me. This is where most people quit, Daniel said. She counts on it. I nodded slowly. I know. Then I smiled. That's why she's already lost. The first thing Eleanor never anticipated was preparation. I didn't hire a flashy attorney. I hired a patient one. Her name was Claire Morrison. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, calm voice, the kind of woman who didn't posture. She listened. She's not suing to win, Claire said after reviewing everything. She's suing to exhaust you. She underestimated how tired I already was, I replied. Claire smiled faintly. Good, that makes you dangerous. We didn't respond immediately. We waited, we gathered, we let Eleanor show her hand. Daniel wasn't spared. Within a week, his access to the trust was frozen. His credit cards stopped working. His board positions were temporarily suspended. Eleanor didn't call him. She didn't need to. The message was clear. Obedience or exile. She's trying to make an example out of me, Daniel said one night, sitting on my couch, staring at nothing. She already did, I replied. At the gala. He laughed bitterly. You think this ends with her? No, I said calmly. I think it ends with you deciding who you are. That question haunted him. I could see it in the way he flinched every time his phone buzzed, in the way he still spoke about her, with a mix of fear and longing. Eleanor didn't just control wealth, she controlled identity. The second thing Eleanor didn't anticipate was memory. Former employees began reaching out, at first anonymously, then openly. A factory supervisor who'd signed an NDA after a workplace accident, an accountant who'd been forced to reclassify payouts, a personal assistant who'd been paid to disappear. They didn't trust me. They trusted the silence. Breaking. I listened. I documented. I connected them to Claire. And slowly, something shifted. This wasn't my story anymore. It was a pattern. Eleanor struck again when she realized that. She filed an emergency motion claiming I was extorting witnesses. Claire laughed when she read it. She's panicking, she said. That's sloppy. We countered with evidence, emails, bank transfers. timelines. The judge denied Eleanor's motion within hours. That denial didn't make headlines, but Eleanor noticed. The third thing Eleanor never anticipated was restraint. She expected rage, public meltdowns, emotional interviews, a desperate woman trying to stay relevant. She didn't get any of that. I declined interviews, stopped responding online. I let the facts speak quietly, while Eleanor screamed through lawyers. That silence unnerved her, because Eleanor Hawthorne had never beaten someone who refused to play her game. One evening, a courier delivered a letter. No law firm, no letterhead. Just thick paper and familiar handwriting. You think you've won something, you've only delayed the inevitable. People like you don't survive long in my world. I read it twice, then I handed it to Claire. She raised an eyebrow. She wrote this herself. Yes, Claire smiled. Good, that's evidence. Daniel finally broke a week later. She called. He said quietly, from a private number. I didn't ask what she said. I didn't need to. She told me she'd forgive everything. He continued. If I publicly recanted, if I said you manipulated me, I asked. He looked at me, then really looked. I told her, no. Something settled in his shoulders as he said it, like a weight he'd carried his whole life had shifted. Said I was dead to her, he added. I nodded. Then she finally told the truth. That night, alone, I stood by my window watching the city breathe below. I thought about the girl who'd agreed to pretend for one night, the girl who'd been humiliated, threatened, erased. She was gone. In her place stood someone Eleanor Hawthorne couldn't categorize. Not a victim, not a pawn, a witness. And witnesses don't disappear quietly. They endure, and in enduring, they dismantle empires piece by piece, because when the truth survives the attack, it stops being a scandal, it becomes history. The courtroom didn't look like justice, it looked like patience. Cold wood, hard benches, fluorescent lights that flattened everyone equally, billionaires and janitors alike. No shun, no applause, no control. Eleanor Hawthorne hated it immediately. She arrived surrounded by attorneys, dressed impeccably, posture flawless, expression carefully neutral. To anyone watching from the outside, she still looked like power personified. But I noticed what others didn't. Her hands trembled when she adjusted her gloves. She sat 2 rows ahead of me and never once turned around. Not until Daniel walked in. He wasn't flanked by lawyers. He wasn't dressed for theater, just a plain suit, shoulders squared, jaw tight. When Eleanor finally looked at him, her expression didn't soften. It sharpened, as if she were already planning how to punish him later. She still believed there would be a later. The judge entered. Proceedings began. This wasn't a criminal trial, not yet. This was civil, depositions, motions, evidence, arguments, but civil court was where Eleanor had always thrived. It was where delay, money, and intimidation did their best work. She leaned back slightly, confident. Until Claire stood. Your Honor, she said calmly, we'd like to enter Exhibit A. The screen lit up. Emails. Not the ones from the gala. New ones. Internal. Recent. Eleanor single quotes. Head snapped up. Her attorney stiffened. The judge leaned forward. These communications, Claire continued, were sent after my clients became a public figure. They demonstrate an ongoing effort to intimidate witnesses, manipulate testimony, and interfere with medical access. The room shifted. Eleanor turned slowly. Her eyes found me. This time, she didn't bother hiding her hatred. The judge allowed the evidence. That was the first blow. Then came the second. Claire stood again. We call Daniel Hawthorne. The air left the room. Eleanor's attorney objected immediately. Relevance, direct, Claire replied, and necessary. The judge allowed it. Daniel walked to the stand. Eleanor stared straight ahead. She didn't look at him once. State your name, the clerk said. Daniel Hawthorne. Claire approached gently. Mr. Hawthorne, were you pressured by your grandmother to make public statements against my client? Yes, Daniel said clearly. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Were you offered financial incentives to do so? Yes. Eleanor's attorney stood again. Objection overruled, the judge said. Claire nodded. Did your grandmother threaten consequences if you refused? Daniel paused. This was the moment Eleanor had controlled his entire life with fear. Fear, double quotes, yes. He said. Silence followed. What consequences? Claire asked. Public disgrace, erasure. Cane struck the floor loudly. The judge's eyes snapped to her. She said nothing, but her mask had slipped. Then Eleanor did something unexpected. She stood. Your Honor, she said coolly, this is becoming absurd. The judge frowned. Mrs. Hawthorne, sit down. Eleanor ignored him. This young woman, she said, pointing at me, inserted herself into my family under false pretenses. Everything that followed was damage control. Claire smiled faintly. Damage control, she repeated. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, we'd like to submit Exhibit F. The screen, CHANGED, a handwritten letter, handwriting. Threatening. Explicit. The same letter she'd sent me weeks earlier. Gasps filled the room. Ellen's face went pale. That letter, Claire said calmly, was written after Mrs. Hawthorne claimed she ceased involvement. The judge leaned back. Mrs. Hawthorne, he said slowly, do you deny writing this? Eleanor opened her mouth, closed it. For the first time in her life, she had no move. The judge recessed the court for 15 minutes. Eleanor was escorted out through a side door. Daniel sat motionless. I didn't comfort him. He had to sit with what he'd chosen, what he'd lost. When court resumed, the tone had changed. The judge denied motions, granted hours. Ordered discovery to proceed immediately. Subpoenas were authorized. Assets were frozen pending investigation. Eleanor Hawthorne was no longer directing the battle. She was reacting to it. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Microphones shoved forward. Emily, do you feel vindicated? I paused. No, I said. I feel finished. That answer confused them. It wasn't dramatic enough, but it was true. Eleanor was escorted past us toward her car. This time, she stopped. She looked at me. You think you've won? She said quietly, but power always returns to where it belongs. I met her gaze steadily. No, I said. Power returns to where it's earned. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she smiled. Not kindly, not sincerely, but knowingly. This isn't over, she said. I nodded. I know. And for the first time that didn't scare me, because Eleanor Hawthorne no longer held the future. The courts did. The public did. And so did I. I watched her drive away, smaller than she'd ever looked. Because when someone spends their life towering over others, they forget what it feels like to stand on level ground. Power doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes. Slowly. Publicly. Permanently. Eleanor Hawthorne's downfall didn't come with handcuffs or sirens. It came with documents, deadlines, court orders she couldn't intimidate away. The kind of ending she'd always forced on others. Quiet, humiliating, irreversible. The investigations multiplied. Regulatory agencies announced formal reviews. Former employees stepped forward once discovery began, unlocking sealed records. International partners distanced themselves. Board members resigned for personal reasons. That phrase appeared again and again, personal reasons. It was the polite way of saying, we see the fire and we're running. Hawthorne Industries stock dipped, then dipped again. Trusts were frozen pending audits. Longtime allies suddenly forgot Eleanor's number. And Eleanor, once untouchable, was forced to sit still. That was the punishment she never anticipated. Daniel lost everything first. Not publicly, quietly. His name vanished from boards. His access to private accounts disappeared overnight. Invitations stopped coming. Old friends stopped answering. He moved into a small apartment downtown. No driver, no assistant, no safety net. One evening, weeks after the court hearing, he sat across from me at a diner, the kind with chipped mugs and laminated menus. I don't know who I am without her, he admitted. I stirred my coffee. That's the point. Now you get to find out. He nodded slowly. I don't expect forgiveness, he said, but I want to do something right. You already did, I replied. You told the truth. It didn't erase what he'd allowed, but it stopped the bleeding. My mother's treatment resumed without issue. No delays, no technical problems. Claire made sure of that. She also made sure Eleanor's letter, every threat, every word was entered into multiple case files. She didn't just expose herself, Claire said one afternoon. She documented herself. I smiled. She always believed rules were for other people. Not anymore, Claire replied. Eleanor was called to testify 3 months later. No cameras inside, no grand speeches, just questions. She answered precisely at first, measured, composed. Then the contradictions surfaced. Emails contradicted statements. Timelines didn't align. Former allies confirmed coercion. Each answer tightened the net. By the end of the day, Eleanor looked older, smaller. Still proud, but diminished. That night, she was admitted to a private medical facility for exhaustion. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The final settlement came quietly. No public admission of guilt, no apology. Just numbers, massive ones, compensation funds, medical trusts, employee restitution, and one clause Eleanor fought hardest against: permanent removal from operational control. When the judge approved it, Eleanor didn't react. She simply closed her eyes. The empire would survive, but it would no longer belong to her. I saw Eleanor one last time months later, not in court, not on television, in a park. She sat alone on a bench, Kane resting beside her, watching children she didn't know play. I almost didn't approach. Almost. You look different, she said without turning. So do you, I replied. She scoffed softly. You came to gloat. No, I said. I came to finish something. She finally looked at me. That there was no fury left, only calculation and something close to regret. You think you broke me, she said. I think, I replied calmly, you broke yourself. I just stopped you from hiding it. She studied me for a long time. You were never supposed to survive, she said. I nodded. That's what made it interesting. She smiled faintly. Tired, genuine, dangerous. Even now, people like you don't come from nowhere, she said. What do you want now? I stood. Nothing from you. That unsettled her more than anything I'd done. As I walked away, she called after me. You know, she said quietly, if I'd met you under different circumstances. I stopped. You would have crushed me anyway, she finished. I turned slightly. Yes, then I left. Life didn't become perfect, it became honest. I went back to school, finished what I'd started, helped Claire consult for workers who needed advocates. Not loudly, not publicly. Deliberately. People still recognized me sometimes. They expected drama. They didn't get it, because revenge, real revenge, isn't about destruction, it's about correction. Months later, a letter arrived, no return address. Inside was a single line, typed. You did what I never could. No signature. I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer, not as a trophy. As a reminder. I once pretended to be someone's fiancée for a night. I walked into a mansion, believing I was disposable. I left having dismantled a dynasty. Not with rage, not with chaos. But with patience. And that was the most devastating revenge of all.